He deceived his brother, he tricked his father, and one night, he dared to fight against God himself. This is no legend, no parable of imagination. This is a story locked inside the oldest pages of Scripture, whispered across centuries, a tale of betrayal, terror, and a midnight struggle that shook the heavens. From the womb to the grave, Jacob's life was marked by conflict between brothers, between nations, and finally, between man and the Almighty. What he saw in the darkness, what he touched in the dust of that riverbank, would leave him scarred forever, yet transformed into Israel, the name that would echo through history. Tonight you will walk into that hidden world through deserts, tents, and visions of angels, through lies and blessings, exile and return, through the very night when a man clung to God and would not let go. This is the untold story of Jacob, the man who fought with God. Long before the man named Jacob ever drew his first breath, before his cries echoed through the tents of his father, a battle was already raging. Not on the fields of war, not between kings, but within the hidden chamber of a mother's womb. Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, son of Abraham, carried within her body the mystery of two unborn sons. But their presence was no quiet waiting, no gentle anticipation. Her very flesh became a battlefield. She felt them thrash, strike, and wrestle as though two warriors already locked in eternal struggle. Their unseen conflict drove her to despair. In anguish, she cried out, "Why is this happening to me?" And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And it was then that God revealed the secret that would set the course of history. Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from within you. One shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. The elder shall serve the younger. In the ancient world, the firstborn held the right of strength, the authority of inheritance, the double portion of blessing. But here before birth, that order was overturned. The script of destiny was rewritten before the ink of life had even touched the parchment of time. Destiny was written before the first cry. The weight of this prophecy could not be ignored. It meant that the violent struggle Rebekah felt was not random, not mere biology. It was divine revelation. Her womb was the stage of nations, Israel and Edom, light and shadow, covenant and conflict. When the day of birth came, the prophecy revealed its first sign. The first child emerged, Esau. His body was red, covered in hair like a garment, a man destined for the hunt, for the open fields, for the wild places of the earth. His very appearance screamed of raw power, primal force, a child of the earth's dust and blood. But then came the second. Smaller, quieter, but his hand gripped the heel of his brother as if refusing to let go. That child was named Jacob the supplanter, the one who grasps, the one who strives to overturn. His destiny was embedded in his name. Even in the moment of his birth, Jacob reached forward with ambition, with hunger, with a desire to seize what was not yet his. What kind of fate begins with conflict in the womb? What kind of story writes its opening act in struggle before the first breath? From the beginning, Jacob was marked by tension between himself and his brother, between heaven and earth, between what was promised and what must be fought for. The boys grew, and as they did, their differences widened into a canyon. Esau became a man of the hunt, a warrior of the wilderness. His bow stretched his quiver full. He brought home the game that his father loved. Isaac's heart favored him, the firstborn, the strong one, the son who seemed destined to carry the family's pride. Jacob was different. He was quiet, dwelling among the tents, a man who watched, listened, and waited. His strength was not in the chase, but in cunning, in patience, in calculation. And Rebekah loved him. Her eyes saw in him the echo of the prophecy, the younger son destined to overturn the order of birth. And so the stage was set. Two brothers, two natures, two nations, still unborn in their full strength. One celebrated for his skill, the other underestimated, yet chosen by heaven. The household of Isaac was no ordinary family. It was the continuation of the covenant God had made with Abraham. The promise of a nation of land of blessing to the world, it all ran through this fragile bloodline. Every choice mattered. Every fracture threatened the future of Israel itself. The meals around the fire not only carried food, but the smoke of rivalry. The father loved the hunter, the mother loved the dreamer. The lines of favoritism drew deep scars into the hearts of sons. Was it merely preference, or was it providence? Did the prophecy ignite division, or did the division reveal the prophecy? It is here in these early years that we glimpse the mystery of Jacob's path. He was not born noble nor crowned with righteousness. He was marked instead with struggle, cunning, and desire. Yet God had chosen him. The elder shall serve the younger. The divine paradox is clear. God does not always choose the strong, the obvious, the favored of men. Sometimes he chooses the one who wrestles, who strives, who refuses to let go even when unworthy. And this choice reverberates far beyond the tents of Isaac. In the ancient Near East, birthright was power. To overturn the elder's rule was unthinkable. Nations rose and fell on the strength of firstborn heirs. But in this moment, God shattered human expectation. The covenant line would not rest on tradition. It would rest on divine will. Destiny is not sealed by birth order, by strength, or by human pride. It is sealed by the voice of God. As the brothers grew, the tension in the prophecy grew with them. For every smile Isaac gave Esau, Jacob watched. For every meal Rebekah prepared for Jacob, Esau fumed. The conflict whispered in the womb had become the conflict of a family, the seed of nations. And behind it all, the silent, unsettling truth lingered. This was no ordinary rivalry. This was the unfolding of a mystery that would shape the destiny of Israel itself. In the tents of Isaac, the air was thick with secrecy. The promise of Abraham's covenant loomed like a storm cloud. Somewhere in the background of every moment lay the question, who will inherit the blessing? Who will carry the promise forward? The stage was ready for betrayal, for hunger, for deception, and for the most shocking exchanges of destiny the world had ever seen. But before any of that, one fact remained unshakable. Rebekah carried within her womb not just 2 sons, but 2 nations. And their struggle had already begun. The prophecy had spoken. The die was cast. The elder shall serve the younger. And with those words, the mystery of Jacob's life opened like a wound across the pages of history. Now step closer, for the struggle is about to break into the open. Esau came first. The midwives gasped when they saw him, his skin flushed red like the clay of the earth, his body thick with hair wild and untamed. He looked less like a child and more like a creature born for the hunt, the kind that would roam the wilderness and command its beasts. His name Esau meant rough, hairy, complete, and the people said, surely this one is destined for strength. But then, as Rebekah drew her next breath, another cry rose. A smaller hand, soft pale, emerged, gripping the heel of his brother as if refusing to let go. The women shouted. Rebekah stared. That child's fingers clung like the claws of destiny itself. They named him Jacob, the one who grasps the supplanter. 2 brothers born in the same moment, already bound by struggle. From the very instant of birth, the prophecy took flesh. The elder, red and fierce, seemed blessed by nature. The younger, quiet and cunning, clung by will. One born to conquer, one born to contend. The air inside the tent carried more than the scent of incense and linen. It carried the tension of 2 futures colliding. Years passed. The brothers grew, but their hearts never met. Esau became what his body promised, a hunter of the wild, his arms strong, his eyes sharp as an eagle's. He lived in the open country, chasing prey across the deserts of Canaan, his laughter echoing in the canyons. Jacob, meanwhile, preferred the tents. He studied, he listened, he waited. He spoke little but thought deeply. Where Esau was passion, Jacob was patience. And Isaac, their father, the son of Abraham, the miracle child of promise, favored Esau. Perhaps it was the taste of venison that captured him, or the strength he saw in his firstborn. He called Esau my son with pride in his voice, the kind only fathers know when looking upon their heirs. But Rebekah watched differently. Her gaze lingered on Jacob, the quiet one, the thinker, the dreamer. In his eyes she saw the echo of the divine message given years ago. 2 nations are in your womb, and the elder shall serve the younger. She remembered every word, every tremor that once shook her body, and she whispered to herself, "It is Jacob, whom the Lord has chosen." A family torn by love itself. Father for the hunter, mother for the schemer. What happens when affection becomes warfare? What happens when prophecy divides a household? The tents of Isaac began to split with invisible lines. The meals shared under one roof carried silent tension. Isaac's prayers grew quieter, Rebekah's whispers sharper. The promise of Abraham, the covenant of heaven, hung in the balance, wrapped in the rivalry of 2 sons. Esau would return from his hunts with the smell of dust and blood. He would bring his father meat, and Isaac would bless him with laughter. "You are my strength, my firstborn, the pride of my old age." Jacob, watching from the shadow of the tent, said nothing. He stirred the stew, his hands steady, his thoughts restless. He knew his father's eyes did not rest upon him, but he also knew something deeper heaven's eyes did. Esau, though blessed with vigor, cared little for the invisible things of God. He lived for the chase, for the thrill of the kill, for the taste of meat and wine. He was a man of impulse, a spirit of the wilderness, fierce but shallow. Jacob, meanwhile, listened to stories of Abraham, the stars of promise, the covenant sealed by God himself. Inside him burned an ambition not of the body but of destiny. He wanted the blessing, not the food, not the flocks, but the very covenant itself. It is here that prophecy meets character. God's foretelling does not rest upon random fate. It finds its vessel in the nature of men. Esau lived by appetite. Jacob lived by longing. One sought satisfaction, the other sought inheritance. Time hardened their difference. When they spoke, their words clashed like flint and stone. Esau mocked Jacob's quietness. Jacob measured Esau's recklessness. Rebekah watched from behind the tent's veil, heart heavy but resolute. She knew something neither son yet understood. The plan of God would not follow the customs of men. But the cost of such a destiny is always division. Imagine the silence of that house, the father blind to heaven's design, the mother burdened by divine knowledge, and the sons bound to an ancient prophecy none of them could escape. The promise that was meant to bring blessing now became a curse within their walls. In the nights of Canaan, under skies filled with countless stars, Jacob often lay awake. He would stare into the darkness and wonder what it meant to be chosen before birth. Did God's choice absolve him of guilt or bind him to responsibility? If the elder must serve the younger, what role was left for mercy, for fairness, for love? These were not questions for the hunter. They belonged to the man of the tents, to the thinker whose mind wrestled with God long before his body ever would. Esau laughed loud and lived fast, his strength like fire consuming wood. But Jacob smoldered. His spirit was the coal beneath the ashes, slow, waiting, dangerous. He understood something about God that few do. That blessing does not always come to the favored, and promise does not always follow the strong. And in that understanding, something darker grew inside him, a willingness to take what destiny had promised, even if it meant deception. Because prophecy, when mixed with pride, can turn even faith into ambition. In the marketplace of Beersheba, men would whisper about the sons of Isaac. The elder is a hunter of beasts, they'd say, but the younger hunts something unseen. Jacob's name began to carry weight. Some admired his cunning, others feared it. For behind his silence was a storm, and behind his calm eyes, calculation. The rivalry that began in the womb had now taken root in the world. Each step they took drew them further apart, Esau toward the wilderness, Jacob toward destiny. And through it all, heaven watched. For this was not merely the story of 2 brothers. It was the unfolding of nations, Edom and Israel, flesh and spirit, earth and heaven. Esau would father kings of the desert. Jacob would birth tribes that would carry the covenant. The struggle of 2 men became the struggle of mankind itself. Who shall inherit the promise, the one who seizes by strength, or the one who clings by faith? And somewhere in the invisible realm, the words of God still echoed, "The elder shall serve the younger." A question lingers for all who hear it. What happens when a family becomes the battlefield of prophecy? When love, loyalty, and divine will collide beneath the same roof, the air in Isaac's camp grew heavy with destiny. The tents whispered with secrets, and though laughter still filled the evenings, the sound was brittle like glass before it shatters. For soon, one meal would ignite the spark that would set the prophecy aflame, and in the smoke of that meal, one brother would rise, and the other would fall. It began on an ordinary day under the fading sun of Canaan, a day that would alter the course of human history. The air was dry thick with dust, and the smell of the wilderness clung to everything it touched. In the distance, Esau returned from the hunt. His bow hung loosely at his side, his skin burned crimson by the desert wind. His breath was shallow, his steps heavy, his hunger consuming him like fire. Inside the tents, Jacob stirred a pot of lentil stew. The scent was rich, earthy, spiced, humble, red as blood, thick as clay. He watched the steam rise like a spirit and smiled quietly to himself. The hunter was coming home empty-handed, and Jacob knew hunger is the doorway to a man's soul. Esau stumbled into the tent, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Quick," he said, "let me have some of that red stew. I am famished." His words were more demand than request. His hands trembled, reaching toward the bowl as though the world itself would end if he did not eat. Jacob's eyes did not blink. He had been waiting for this moment, though he could never explain why. Perhaps prophecy whispered beneath his thoughts, urging him to act. Perhaps destiny itself leaned close. His voice was calm but sharp. "First, sell me your birthright." The words fell like a blade. Esau froze, his brow furrowed. "What good is a birthright to me?" he snapped. "I am dying of hunger." For a bowl of lentils, the inheritance of nations was exchanged. The covenant of Abraham, the promise of land of blessing, of descendants as numerous as the stars, hung suspended between two brothers and a single meal. Jacob leaned closer. "Swear to me first." Esau swore, and with that, the divine order shifted. He traded eternity for a fleeting taste. He handed the weight of nations to his brother for the warmth of stew on his tongue. The hunter who once ruled the wilderness became captive to his appetite. The quiet man of tents became heir to God's covenant. The moment was silent yet thunderous. Somewhere in the unseen heavens, the angels must have gasped. The choice was not only a family's turning point, it was the echo of mankind's eternal weakness. From Eden to Canaan, humanity had always reached for what was near and surrendered what was eternal. Esau ate. The red stew slid down his throat, his hunger sated, his fate sealed. He wiped his mouth, rose, and left. Scripture says simply, "Thus Esau despised his birthright." Despised, not forgotten, not misunderstood, despised. He rejected the very blessing that could have carried him into history's light. How many times do we too despise the sacred for the immediate? How often do we trade the invisible promises of heaven for the tangible pleasures of now? The tent that day became more than a kitchen. It became an altar. The bowl was no longer food. It was a sacrament of weakness. And the red stew, symbol of blood, symbol of earth, became the ink that signed away an inheritance older than time. Jacob watched him leave the bowl still warm, the air trembling with consequence. For the first time, Jacob felt the gravity of what he had done. He had grasped as his name foretold. But beneath the satisfaction, a shadow stirred. Was it victory or theft? Was he fulfilling prophecy or forcing God's hand? His eyes wandered toward the horizon where Esau disappeared. The desert swallowed the hunter, and Jacob sat in the silence, unsure if he had gained everything or lost something divine. The story could have ended here with a simple exchange between two brothers. But heaven was not done with Jacob. The birthright was his now, but the blessing, the spoken fatherly seal of covenant, was not. It still rested with Isaac, old and nearly blind, the keeper of words that shaped the destiny of tribes. And so in this moment of eerie calm, Jacob's path darkened. His heart, once patient, began to conspire. What began as hunger between brothers would soon become deception between son and father. The prophecy demanded fulfillment, and Jacob, driven by ambition, guided by Rebekah, would find himself walking the thin line between divine promise and human deceit. Prophecy alone does not sanctify our actions. The chosen can still sin. The promised can still fall. Destiny is not a shield, it is a mirror revealing who we truly are. Jacob would wrestle not just with men, but with his own reflection, his own motives. He wanted the promise of heaven, but he reached for it with the hands of earth. The red stew still boiled on the fire as though mocking what had just happened. The smell lingered, a haunting reminder of the price of haste. Generations later, Israel would remember this moment. They would speak of Esau as a warning, a man who sold the sacred for survival. And the prophets would cry out, "Do not despise your inheritance as Esau did." Esau the hunter became the symbol of the flesh, driven by appetite, bound to the moment. Jacob the grasping twin became the vessel of divine tension, chosen by grace, yet refined by struggle. And so from a single meal, a pattern was born, the eternal conflict between desire and destiny, body and spirit, the seen and the unseen. Every kingdom, every heart still fights this battle. The stew still simmers in the tent of our souls, calling us to choose between the hunger of now and the inheritance of forever. Jacob, now heir of the birthright, looked up at the night sky. The stars glimmered like distant promises, the same stars once shown to Abraham, but their light seemed colder now. He had seized what was promised, yet he felt the unease of one who takes what is not freely given. In the silence, he must have wondered if heaven approved or merely watched. And Esau, somewhere beyond the hills, slept with a full stomach and an empty future. The brothers had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. The prophecy whispered in Rebekah's womb had taken its first form. The elder had served the younger, but not in the way anyone expected. For a bowl of lentils, the destiny of nations had been exchanged. Time would prove the weight of that moment. The sons of Esau would rise to build Edom's red mountains fierce and proud. The sons of Jacob would wander, wrestle, and rise to become Israel. The tension of that trade would echo through centuries, through kingdoms and prophets, through blood and faith. And yet, if you listen closely, beneath the surface of this ancient story lies a question meant not only for Jacob or Esau, but for all of us. Do we too trade eternity for what satisfies us in a moment? Do we sell what is sacred for what is easy? The stew still calls, the hunger still whispers, and the choice remains the same. Jacob did not yet know it, but this was only the beginning. The meal that changed history would ignite a chain of deceit and exile, love and loss, until one night many years later he would find himself alone, wrestling in the dark with the very God who had chosen him. The red stew was long gone, but the struggle for blessing had just begun. The years slipped by, but the shadows inside Isaac's tent only deepened. The old patriarch, once the miracle child of Abraham, had grown frail and blind. His sight had faded, but his voice still carried the weight of heaven. To bless was no small thing in the ancient world. It was to speak destiny, to release divine authority through words that could never be recalled. Once spoken, they lived forever. And Isaac knew his time was short. Death whispered in the corners of his tent. So he called for Esau, his firstborn, the son of his strength. "My son," he said, his voice trembling, "take your bow and quiver. Hunt for me some game. Prepare it as I love it, that I may eat and bless you before I die." This was more than a father's wish. It was the passing of power, the moment when the covenant of Abraham would be transferred. Heaven held its breath, for the words Isaac would soon speak could not be undone. But Rebekah heard. From the shadows beyond the curtain, her heart froze. She remembered the prophecy, "The elder shall serve the younger." The time had come, yet Isaac was about to give the blessing to the wrong son. In that instant, she knew if prophecy was to be fulfilled, deceit must become the instrument of destiny. Her voice was urgent, hushed, trembling as she ran to Jacob. "Listen to me," she said. "I overheard your father speaking to your brother. Before the day ends, he will bless Esau. Go to the flock, bring me 2 young goats, and I will prepare them just as your father likes. Then you will bring it to him, and he will bless you instead." Jacob hesitated. "But my brother is a hairy man," he said, "and I am smooth-skinned. What if he touches me? I would appear a deceiver and bring a curse upon myself." Rebekah's eyes darkened with resolve. "Let the curse fall on me," she whispered. "Only obey my voice." In that single exchange, mother and son crossed the line between faith and manipulation. The woman who once carried prophecy in her womb now carried conspiracy in her heart. Jacob fetched the goats. Rebekah cooked, her hands trembling as she worked. She dressed Jacob in Esau's best clothes, the smell of the wilderness still clinging to them, leather dust and blood. Then she covered his hands and neck with the skins of the young goats, rough and coarse to the touch. And so the quiet man of tents became the hunter's shadow. Jacob entered his father's tent. The air was thick, still heavy with incense and fear. Isaac lay reclined, his eyes pale and vacant. "My father Jacob," said softly. Isaac turned his head. "Who are you, my son?" "I am Esau, your firstborn." Jacob lied. "I have done as you asked. Rise and eat of my game that your soul may bless me." Isaac frowned. "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," Jacob replied. The deceiver invoked the name of God to seal his lie. Isaac's old hands trembled. He beckoned. "Come near that I may touch you to know whether you are truly my son Esau." Jacob stepped closer. The moment slowed every heartbeat, a drum of dread. Isaac's fingers brushed against the goat skin on Jacob's hands. His brow furrowed. The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's. Suspense thickened like smoke. Heaven must have shuddered as truth and falsehood touched in one trembling moment. Yet Isaac did not withdraw. The smell of Esau's garments, the scent of fields, and the wild convinced him. "My son Isaac," said at last, "bring me the food." Jacob placed the meal before his father. Isaac ate slowly, tasting deception without knowing it. Then he drank the wine Jacob poured. A strange calm fell over the tent. "Come near and kiss me, my son." Jacob leaned forward. Isaac breathed in the smell of the clothes, the wilderness, the hunt, the earth, and then he spoke the blessing. "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." With those words, the invisible crown of covenant passed from Esau to Jacob. The divine inheritance spoken by trembling lips could never be undone. A father's words once spoken could never be recalled. Jacob stepped back, heart pounding, breath shallow. He had done it. The prophecy was fulfilled, or so he thought. He slipped from the tent just as Esau returned from the hunt. The sound of the bough clattering against the ground broke the silence. Father Esau called joyfully, "Arise and eat of your son's game that you may bless me." Isaac froze. The cup fell from his hand. "Who are you?" "I am your son." Esau answered, confusion turning to dread. "Your firstborn Esau." Terror filled the tent. Scripture says Isaac trembled violently. "Who was it then?" He gasped, "that brought me food, and I blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed." Esau's cry tore through the camp, a sound so raw that the servants outside wept. "Bless me, my father, bless me also," he begged. But the blessing was gone. Isaac's voice cracked. "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." The prophecy had been fulfilled through human deception, and the cost was unbearable. Esau's face hardened. His tears burned. "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" he cried. "He has supplanted me these 2 times, first my birthright, now my blessing." And then, in a voice cold and final, Esau swore, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." The tent of blessing became a chamber of wrath. The hunter who once laughed now thirsted for blood. And Jacob, the quiet schemer, became a fugitive from his own home. Rebekah heard of Esau's vow and sent for her son. "Flee," she urged. "Run to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay until your brother's fury turns away." Jacob fled into the wilderness, the same land where his grandfather once wandered. The sun sank behind him as he left everything behind: his home, his father, the promise he had stolen. He carried the blessing, yes, but it burned like fire in his hands. For how can peace dwell in what was taken by deceit? Jacob had the covenant but no rest, the promise but no home, the favor of God but the hatred of man. He had gained everything and lost everyone. As night fell, Isaac's tent was filled with silence. The old man's heart was broken. Esau's fury festered and Rebekah wept alone. The cost of divine promise had revealed its sharpest edge. And somewhere in the desert, Jacob walked beneath the same stars that once shone upon Abraham. The wind whispered through the sand like the voice of prophecy fulfilled and yet unfinished. For though Jacob had seized the blessing, heaven was not done with him. His deception had opened the door to exile, to vision, to the long road of redemption. The fugitive was about to see heaven open. The night Jacob fled from his brother's wrath was cold and moonless. The sand whispered under his feet as if mocking him with every hurried step. Behind him lay the camp of his father, his home, his comfort, his mother's voice. Ahead stretched the endless wilderness of Canaan, vast and indifferent. Each gust of wind carried the memory of Esau's fury. When father dies, I will kill my brother. Jacob was alone, hunted and hollow. The blessing that once seemed a triumph now felt like a curse. He had taken his brother's place, worn his brother's clothes, and spoken his brother's name, and now he ran for his life, chased by his own deceit. The deceiver had become the fugitive. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound in the distance reminded him of Esau's voice. His heart beat not from courage, but from the gnawing weight of guilt and fear. The desert at night is no friend, it mirrors the darkness within. Jacob had always planned his moves carefully, but now there was no plan, only escape. He walked for days. Hunger pressed against him, thirst clawed at his throat. The land around him was barren, jagged hills, thorny shrubs, the endless howl of desert wind. For the first time in his life, Jacob had no schemes left. No mother to guide him, no father to bless him, no brother to outwit. Only God remained, and Jacob did not know whether that was comfort or judgment. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars emerged, he stopped. He found a stone and laid it beneath his head. There, in the silence of exile, he closed his eyes, and the fugitive saw heaven open. In his sleep, Jacob saw a vision, a ladder reaching from earth to heaven. Its base stood in the dust beside him. Its top vanished into light. Angels ascended and descended upon it, moving between worlds as if carrying messages of glory and mercy. Above it stood the Lord himself, and the voice of heaven spoke into Jacob's fear. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring shall be as the dust of the earth. I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go and bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken. The fugitive saw heaven open and discovered that even in exile, God was already there. Jacob woke with a start, his heart pounding, his breath sharp in the cold air. The stars burned brighter than before, as if the heavens themselves still glowed from the vision. He whispered, trembling, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." The desert had become a temple, and the ground of his fear had turned into the threshold of revelation. Jacob rose while dawn crept over the horizon. The stone beneath his head was rough, but to him it was holy. He lifted it, set it upright, and poured oil over it as a memorial. And he called the place Bethel, the house of God. This was no mere ritual, it was a vow. Alone in the wilderness, Jacob made a promise. If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I go and give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone shall be his house. For the first time, Jacob spoke not of Abraham's God or Isaac's God, but his God. The faith of his fathers had become personal. Heaven had found the fugitive. But even as he stood in awe, the path ahead remained uncertain. The promise was real, but so was the peril. Esau's fury still burned behind him, and the strange land of Haran lay far beyond the desert's edge. The vision had given Jacob purpose, but not peace. The God who promised protection also promised struggle, for this was not the blessing of comfort, it was the blessing of calling. Jacob was chosen not because he was good, but because grace needed a vessel. As he journeyed onward, the words of God followed him like a shadow of light, "I am with you." Those words carried him through the heat of day and the chill of night. When his body weakened, he repeated them. When fear crept in, he remembered the ladder, the angels, the voice that spoke from above. But a question lingered in the dust behind him. Would Jacob, the man of schemes, ever learn to trust the God of promise? Could he who once took blessing by deceit learn to receive it by faith? The wilderness does not answer, it refines. Every step away from Canaan was a step into the furnace of transformation. Jacob's feet were blistered, but his spirit began to soften. The God who met him at Bethel was no longer a distant deity of patriarchs. He was a God who stooped low enough to meet a runaway in the dirt. Jacob the deceiver had been seen. He had been called. And though he still bore the scent of sin, heaven had marked him for destiny. When night came again, he looked back toward the west. The desert wind carried faint echoes of his past, the laughter of Esau, the voice of Isaac, the sorrow of Rebekah. He whispered into the dark, "If I ever return, it will not be as I was." The man who ran in fear would one day return in faith, but not before he met the fire of his own becoming. As the stars gathered above him once more, Jacob continued his journey toward Haran. Each mile carried both exile and promise, guilt and grace. The latter had shown him that heaven and earth were not divided, that God's presence stretched even into his brokenness. And so, with trembling hope, Jacob stepped deeper into the unknown, guided by a promise he barely understood, and a God he had only just begun to know. The fugitive had seen heaven open, and soon in a distant land he would see love, deception, and destiny intertwine again. For the next chapter of Jacob's story would not be written in sand and stars, but in the eyes of a woman named Rachel. The journey carried Jacob eastward through wilderness and time. Dust clung to his skin, and his heart carried the weight of both promise and exile. Weeks passed, the sun rose and fell like the beat of judgment, until one morning, after miles of silence, he saw the first sign of life, a well in the open field. 3 flocks of sheep lay nearby, waiting for water. Jacob approached, his voice hoarse from travel. "My brothers, where are you from?" They answered. "We are from Haran." At the sound of that name, Jacob's spirit stirred. Haran, the land of his mother's kin, the place of refuge, the destination of his flight. He asked again, "Do you know Laban, son of Nahor?" They nodded. "We know him. And look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." The air seemed to tremble at the name. Jacob turned, and there she was, Rachel, walking toward the well. The sun caught the veil that framed her face. The dust glimmered in her hair like gold. She moved with the grace of the desert wind, a shepherdess in her father's fields. For a moment, time stopped. The fugitive forgot his exile. His heart, so long hunted by fear, now found something entirely new: wonder. Rachel approached, her eyes sharp yet gentle, her hands steady on the staff. When she reached the well, Jacob looked around at the other shepherds. "Why do you wait?" he asked. "The sun is still high. Water the sheep and return to your pastures." They answered, "We cannot. The stone that seals the well is large. We wait until all the flocks are gathered." Jacob turned his gaze toward the stone, a massive slab meant to guard the water until evening. Without hesitation, he walked forward, gripped the edge, and rolled it aside himself. Dust and sweat covered him, but his strength burned like hidden fire. Then wordlessly, he drew water for Rachel's flock. The wanderer became a hero. The exile found purpose in a single act of kindness. When he finished, Jacob stood before her and wept. It was not sorrow, but the overwhelming flood of destiny. "I am Jacob," he said softly, "your father's kinsman, son of Rebekah." Rachel's eyes widened. She turned and ran toward her home, her voice echoing across the fields. "Father, my mother's kin has come." Within hours, Jacob was brought before Laban, the man he would soon both serve and suffer under. Laban greeted him with open arms. "You are my bone and my flesh," he said. "Stay with me." And Jacob stayed. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and Jacob worked among Laban's flocks. But his heart was already bound. He loved Rachel, not with the fleeting desire of youth, but with the deep ache of destiny. She was the embodiment of the promise, grace after exile, beauty after struggle. So he went to Laban and said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. 7 years, a lifetime of labor traded for love." But Jacob did not hesitate. His heart saw no burden in the waiting. Scripture says those years seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. He worked through scorching summers and freezing nights, through storms and seasons. His hands blistered, his back bent, but his heart unwavering. Each sunrise brought him closer to the wedding day. At last the years were complete. Jacob stood before Laban and said, "Give me my wife that I may go in unto her, for my time is fulfilled." The feast was prepared. Music and laughter filled the tents. Torches flickered, wine flowed. Night descended upon Haran with a warmth Jacob had never known. Veiled and silent, the bride was brought to him, her face hidden beneath layers of linen. The air was thick with incense, the drums echoed like heartbeats. And Jacob took her into the dark. The deceiver who once hid behind goatskins to steal a blessing now held deception in his own hands and did not yet know it. Morning came. The first light broke through the tent, and Jacob turned to see the woman beside him. His breath caught. It was not Rachel. It was Leah, the elder sister. The deceiver was deceived. He burst from the tent, his voice thundering across the camp. "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban stood calm, the shadow of a smile curling on his lips. "It is not our custom," he said slowly, "to give the younger before the elder. Complete the week with Leah, and then you may also have Rachel for another 7 years of service." In one night, Jacob's dream became a snare. The trickster had met his match. He had once clothed himself in another's identity. Now another wore the veil of his desire. Destiny had turned its mirror upon him. Jacob's heart broke, but he agreed. Love demanded it. He completed Leah's wedding feast and then took Rachel as his second wife. And he served Laban 7 more years. For 14 years, Jacob labored in a foreign land, trapped in the web he once spun for others. The man who deceived was now deceived. The man who grasped was now grasped by time. Yet even in his sorrow there was mercy. For love, though born in deception, can still reveal divine truth. God was shaping Jacob not through favor but through frustration. Every year of toil was a hammer striking pride into humility. Every dawn was a whisper. What you took by trickery, you must now learn by patience. Beneath the surface of this tale lies the ancient irony of heaven. God allows Jacob to meet himself in the form of Laban. The deceiver must become the deceived to understand grace. The years passed and Jacob's household grew. He gained flocks and children, joy and exhaustion. Yet through it all, his love for Rachel never faded. She remained his dream, his hope, the proof that even exiles can find beauty in barren lands. And when the 14th year finally ended, Jacob stood once more before Laban. The sun burned red behind them and Jacob's voice was steady. "Send me away that I may go to my own country. I have served you faithfully." Laban's smile did not fade. The game between them was not over, but that is a story yet to come. For now, the man who once ran from Esau had found a new prison, bound not by fear but by love. In Jacob's longing for Rachel, we taste our own hunger for what seems out of reach. Which loves have you waited for? Which dreams have you served for years? Tell your story below and let the community hold it with you. The years passed, and Haran became both Jacob's refuge and his prison. He had entered the land as a fugitive, but he would not leave as one. The deceiver had become a servant, the runaway had become a laborer. Yet behind the sweat, behind the bargains and betrayals, an unseen hand was at work. Jacob's life in Laban's house was a paradox: prosperity tangled in manipulation. He tended the flocks by day, counted the stars by night, and every dawn carried the same question. Was this punishment or preparation? The land seemed to mock him with its fertility. The sheep multiplied, the servants sang. The air was full of life, but Jacob's soul was haunted by silence. He worked under a man who mirrored his own cunning, and every deal he made was another snare. Laban was no fool. He saw the increase, the divine touch on Jacob's work. The herds grew strong, the lambs healthy, the wells never dried. Laban's wealth surged, but envy grew with it. He changed Jacob's wages 10 times each time with deceitful intent. Spots, stripes, speckles, every condition was meant to limit Jacob's gain. God turned the scheme on its head. The spotted lambs thrived when they were not supposed to. The striped flocks multiplied beyond reason. Jacob's tent filled with servants, cattle, and treasure. The deceiver was mastering deception itself, but now his hands were guided by something greater than his wit. A man flawed, yet favored. Jacob stood in the fields one evening, watching the golden light fall across his flocks. The sound of bleating and wind filled the valley. His hands were rough, his face aged by years of toil, but in that moment he saw it clearly. "It was not my cunning that made me prosper," he whispered. "It was the God of my father, the fear of Isaac, who kept me." Wave peak. For the first time, Jacob understood that the God who had found him at Bethel was still walking beside him. Even in exile, even in imperfection, the covenant had not abandoned him. But Laban's heart darkened. His eyes narrowed as he watched Jacob's success. What was once partnership became resentment. The servants whispered, the daughters of Laban wept, and Rachel and Leah looked upon their husband and said, "Our father has sold us and devoured our dowry." Jacob knew the time had come. Late one night, as the wind moaned across the desert plains, he gathered his wives and children. The moon cast long shadows across the tents. "Your father's face is no longer toward me as before," he said, "but the God of my father has been with me. I have seen him in a dream. He said, 'Return to the land of your fathers and I will be with you.'" Rachel and Leah nodded. "Do whatever God has said to you." And so they fled silently, swiftly, while Laban was away shearing sheep. The hunter had once become a fugitive. Now the servant became the runaway once more. But this time Jacob was not running from wrath. He was running toward destiny. The journey was long. Behind them, Haran shimmered under the heat of memory. Ahead lay the land of promise and the brother he had betrayed. Between them, the desert, vast, merciless, holy. Days later, Laban learned of the escape. Rage overtook him, and he gathered his men to pursue Jacob. Dust rose behind his horses like the smoke of war. But on the 7th night, as he slept, God appeared to him in a dream. "Be careful," the voice said, "that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." Even Laban, master of trickery, was checked by the hand of heaven. When he finally overtook Jacob, the desert fell silent. The tents of both men faced each other like kingdoms at war. But instead of swords, there were words. "Why did you flee?" Secretly, Laban demanded. "Why did you steal away like a thief?" Jacob's voice trembled with anger and truth. "Because I was afraid," he said, "for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. These 20 years I have served you, your ewes and your goats miscarried not. I bore the heat of the day and the frost of the night, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed." For the first time, Jacob stood his ground, not as the deceiver, but as a man defended by the justice of God. Laban's face softened. The wind between them shifted. "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children," he said. "But come now, let us make a covenant." So they built a mound of stones, and Jacob called it Gilead, the heap of witness. There they swore by the name of God that neither would harm the other. They ate together, sealing peace with bread. And when dawn came, Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren and returned to his land. The deceiver's cycle had finally broken. The one who once schemed for blessing now stood beneath open sky, blessed not by guile but by grace. Jacob watched the horizon burn with sunrise. His flocks stirred, his children laughed, and his wives packed their tents. The exile was ending, but the journey was far from over. For now, another shadow awaited him in the distance, the brother whose memory still haunted his dreams. He had escaped Laban, but not himself. Why does God bless the undeserving? Perhaps because grace is not a reward, it is a mirror. It shows us what we are without it. Jacob had outwitted a deceiver, outrun a master, and survived exile, but the truest battle still waited, not in the wilderness, but within his soul. The sun climbed higher, and Jacob turned his face toward Canaan. Each step homeward echoed like prophecy fulfilled. Yet in the silence between footfalls, heaven whispered again, "You will not enter my promise until you face your past." The wind of Canaan called like a forgotten song. After 20 years in exile, Jacob heard the voice of God once more. "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." He stood beneath a wide, starlit sky, the same stars that had once shone over Abraham and Isaac. The promise still lingered above him, ancient and unbroken. But as the night whispered through the tents, another voice rose inside him, older, darker. It was the memory of Esau. The past was not dead, it was waiting. Jacob had fled from a brother's wrath, and now God was sending him back toward it. The same brother whose last words had been a vow of murder. Time could not erase that echo. "When my father dies, I will kill my brother Jacob." Fear crept through Jacob's chest like cold fire. He had wrestled with deceit, endured exile, survived Laban's cunning, but Esau's anger was something else. It was pure, unresolved, righteous. Yet God's command was clear: return. Jacob obeyed. He gathered his family, his servants, and his herds. The desert groaned under the weight of his wealth. Flocks of goats, camels, sheep, oxen, and donkeys stretched across the horizon. What had begun as a fugitive's flight was now a caravan of abundance. But blessing had not banished fear. As they approached the borderlands of Edom, Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother. "Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys, flocks and servants. I send word to find favor in your eyes." The messengers departed into the silence of the desert. Hours passed, then days. When they returned, their faces were pale. They said only one thing: "Esau is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." The words fell like thunder. Esau was coming, not with open arms, but with an army. Jacob's hands shook. He looked upon his wives and children, the innocent lives behind him, and knew what this might mean. He divided his people into two camps, saying, "If Esau attacks one, the other may escape." It was a desperate logic born not of strategy, but of dread. That night Jacob prayed, not as the trickster, but as the broken man who had run too far to run anymore. "O God of my father, Abraham, and God of my father Isaac," he whispered, "I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies you have shown me. Deliver me, I pray you, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I fear him." For the first time, Jacob confessed the truth he had hidden all his life. He was afraid. There, under the open sky, the deceiver's cleverness finally dissolved. Only humility remained. But Jacob was still Jacob. Even in his fear, he planned. He gathered a gift, a peace offering of staggering size. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 males. He divided them into droves and sent them ahead wave after wave across the desert. To each servant he said, "When Esau meets you and asks, 'Whose are these?' you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present to my lord Esau. He is behind us.'" One caravan after another vanished into the night, bearing gifts of fear disguised as generosity. The plan was simple: soften Esau's wrath before the meeting. But beneath it all lay something deeper. Jacob was trying to buy peace from a brother whose forgiveness could not be purchased. He watched the herds disappear over the horizon, each step a plea for mercy. dust rose like incense. The sky turned crimson as the sun sank. And still Esau's shadow grew nearer. Jacob's camp grew quiet. The laughter of children faded. The servants whispered in fear. Even the animals seemed restless, as if sensing the tension of heaven itself. Twilight deepened into night. The river Jabbok flowed nearby, dark and wide, its surface glimmering like a mirror of uncertainty. Jacob divided his family once more, servants and children first, Leah next, then Rachel last. He sent them across the river along with all he owned. He remained behind, alone. The man who once grasped his brother's heel now stood at the edge of the same land he had fled, caught between the promise of God and the vengeance of man. He looked toward the river and whispered, "Tomorrow I will see his face." The words hung in the air, heavy with both dread and hope. The stars burned overhead, silent witnesses to a soul on the edge of transformation. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of the desert and the weight of memory. Jacob knelt by the river. The water rippled beneath his reflection, half light, half shadow. He no longer looked like the man who had stolen a blessing. He looked like a man about to face judgment. Tomorrow, two brothers would meet, one carrying the wound of betrayal, the other the burden of guilt. Jacob closed his eyes, breathing the night into his lungs. He had wealth, but no safety, blessing, but no peace, and the promise of God still shimmering like a distant flame. He did not know that before dawn that flame would descend and wrestle him to the ground. The darkness thickened. The campfires across the river flickered faintly, voices dim and far away. Jacob lay down by the water, but sleep would not come. Fear, guilt, and faith warred within him. He whispered again to no one, and to God, "Deliver me." The stage was set. The river before him was more than a boundary. It was a baptism by struggle, a threshold between who he had been and who he was meant to become. And as the night deepened, the silence grew strange. It felt alive, as if something unseen had entered the camp. A presence, a weight. Jacob's eyes opened. He was no longer alone, but that the battle that would define eternity, the night when a man wrestled God, belongs to the next chapter. As Jacob crossed the river alone and trembling, he faced his greatest fear. "Tell us what river stands before you. Together we journey across." The river Jabbok whispered like a dark secret under the stars. The camp was silent on the far side. Wives, children, servants, animals, all asleep beneath the shroud of night. But on this side alone, beneath the indifferent sky, Jacob remained. He sat by the water, listening to the sound of it, the slow current moving through stone and shadow. Every ripple seemed to carry a question he could not escape. "Who are you now, Jacob?" He had fled his father's tent a lifetime ago, clutching a stolen blessing. He had deceived, endured, prospered, and now he was returning to face the very brother who once swore to kill him. The road behind him was full of cunning. The road ahead was full of fear. Between the two, between what he had been and what he might become, stood the river. The night deepened. The stars turned overhead like watchful eyes. Then without sound, something shifted in the darkness. A presence. Close. Immediate. The air grew dense, heavy, as if time itself held its breath. Jacob turned and was struck. A man lunged from the shadows, fierce and silent. No words, no warning, only the force of collision, flesh against flesh, dust rising like smoke. The two figures fell into the dirt, grappling, locked in a struggle both earthly and otherworldly. This was no thief. This was God in human form. Jacob did not know it yet. He fought as a man fights for survival, every muscle straining, every breath a prayer. The night filled with the sound of their struggle, the scrape of limbs, the rasp of gravel, the low guttural cries of exhaustion and fury. This was no ordinary fight. It was the collision of heaven and earth, of divine purpose and human pride. The stranger's strength was beyond measure, yet Jacob resisted. His arms burned, his lungs screamed, but he would not yield. Every twist, every throw, every desperate clutch in the dust was more than physical. It was symbolic. Jacob had been wrestling all his life with Esau, with Laban, with himself, and now he wrestled with the very God who had pursued him through every deceit and exile. The struggle lasted through the long hours of darkness. The stars shifted westward. Sweat and blood mingled on Jacob's skin. His breath came in ragged bursts. At one moment, the stranger's hand caught Jacob's shoulder and forced him down. But Jacob's knee found purchase. His arms tightened. His body refused surrender. He gasped through his teeth, "I will not let go. The human will defy the divine hand." But then suddenly the stranger touched Jacob's hip. Just a touch, a simple gesture, and pain exploded through Jacob's body like fire. His leg buckled. His hip was wrenched out of joint, searing agony cutting through him. He collapsed into the dirt, one knee in the mud, the other twisted, his body trembling. But still he would not let go. The stranger spoke calm and terrible. "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." Jacob's voice was hoarse, desperate yet defiant. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The deceiver who once stole a blessing now begged for one face to face. His grip, once used for manipulation, was now a grip of surrender. Jacob was not fighting to conquer, he was clinging to survive. The stranger paused. "What is your name?" Jacob swallowed, his body shaking. "Jacob," he said, the name that meant deceiver, supplanter. The figure's voice broke through the night like thunder and mercy entwined. "Your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Silence fell. The night itself seemed to stop breathing. The river murmured softly, the stars hung motionless above them. Something ancient and divine had just shifted inside the man once called Jacob. Jacob's grip loosened, his body trembled. "Tell me your name," he whispered. The stranger replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. The blessing Jacob had stolen by deception was now given by grace. The presence lifted, the weight of it faded into the air. The first light of dawn broke across the horizon. The river shimmered in gold and silver, and the mist rose like incense. Jacob lay in the dirt, panting, trembling, alive. His hip throbbed with pain, but in that wound was something sacred. For the first time, he understood victory was not in strength but surrender. He rose, limping, his hand pressed against his side. Blood on his palm, dust on his face, light in his eyes. The horizon blazed red like fire, and the sun lifted over the hills of Canaan. The man who once fled in deceit now walked in truth. The one who once stole blessings now bore one carved into his very flesh. He named the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and my life has been spared." Each step was agony. Each step was revelation. The limp was not a curse, it was a mark, a reminder that no one wrestles with God and remains unchanged. The dawn spread wide, and Jacob's shadow stretched before him, broken but blessed. The name Israel echoed in his mind, not as a title of victory, but of transformation. It meant God fights. And in that meaning lay the truth of every soul that struggles, that God himself enters our battles not to destroy us, but to break us free. Jacob had not overcome God. He had been overcome by God and found life in the defeat. As the sun climbed, Jacob could see the glimmer of movement in the far distance, dust rising, the approach of Esau and his 400 men. The old fear stirred within him, but something in him had changed. He no longer walked as the deceiver. He walked as Israel. He stood at the river's edge, his limp steady, his heart quiet. The pain in his hip throbbed with every step, yet his spirit was strong. He had faced heaven and lived. What was there left to fear on earth? A man who has seen God no longer fears man. The river behind him shimmered with light, the same river where the old Jacob had died and the new Israel had been born. The water murmured like a benediction, "You have wrestled, and you have prevailed." He turned toward the horizon where the shapes of Esau's men blurred in the rising heat. The day of reckoning had come, but so had redemption. The God who wounded him was also the God who would protect him. The night that broke him had also made him whole. Jacob, now Israel, took one final look back at the river Jabbok. his reflection broken by ripples, his soul mended by grace. And then, limping but unafraid, he walked into the sunrise. The fugitive had become the father of nations. The man who fought with God now carried his name. And the world would remember forever the night when heaven came down not to punish, but to transform. The dawn broke over the hills of Seir like a curtain of fire. The wind carried dust across the valley, and in that dust, two shadows moved toward each other. One was Esau, the hunter, broad and fierce, with 400 men at his back. The other was Jacob, limping alone at the front of his family, each step carved with pain and faith. The air itself trembled with memory. Two brothers divided by deception, and decades now faced the day that would decide both their fates. The hunter approached the deceiver, advanced. Jacob bowed once, then again. 7 times he lowered himself to the ground before Esau, the gesture of complete surrender. Dust clung to his face. Humility clung to his soul. He had stolen his brother's blessing. Now he offered his life as payment. The world seemed to hold its breath. Esau dismounted. He began to walk forward, slowly, deliberately. His men halted behind him. Every footstep was heavy, echoing through Jacob's heart like thunder. Jacob's lips moved without sound, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a confession. Then it happened. The hunter embraced the deceiver. Esau ran forward, threw his arms around his brother, and wept. The two men fell into the dust, tears washing away 20 years of hatred. The one who had sworn to kill now kissed the one who had deceived him. It was as if time itself bowed to grace. The curse of their father's tent had become the covenant of forgiveness. For the first time since their birth, the twins were not at war. Jacob lifted his eyes, astonished. The scar on his hip throbbed, but this pain was different. It was the pain of redemption. He said softly, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." Forgiveness, once thought impossible, had come as a mirror of divine mercy. The face of his brother became the face of the God who had spared him. The two parted not as enemies, but as brothers reborn. Esau returned to his mountains. Jacob continued toward Canaan, the land of his promise, the land of his fathers. The limp that marked his step became the rhythm of his pilgrimage. Every pain in his body was a reminder that grace costs something. He built an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. The name no longer belonged to deceit, but to destiny. Years passed. The tents of Jacob grew vast flocks spread across the valleys. Children filled the camp with laughter. Yet even blessings can carry shadows. Rachel, his beloved, conceived again. On the road to Bethlehem, her time came. The pain was fierce, and the desert echoed with her cries. As she labored, she named the child Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob, holding her fading hand, whispered, "No, his name shall be Benjamin, the son of my right hand." The love that had once defied time now bowed before mortality. Rachel died there, and Jacob buried her beside the road, raising a pillar over her tomb. The man who once grasped his brother's heel now grasped the edge of eternity. From that day, the shadow of loss never left him. But life moved forward as it always does. His sons grew strong, restless, ambitious. 12 in all, each carrying both the promise and the flaw of their father. Among them was Joseph the dreamer. Jacob loved him more than all the others, for he was Rachel's firstborn, the image of her eyes. He clothed Joseph in a coat of many colors, a garment that glimmered with favor. The seed of jealousy was planted in the hearts of his brothers. They conspired against him, betrayed him, and sold him into slavery. When Jacob heard the lie that a wild beast had devoured his beloved son, he tore his garments, covered himself in sackcloth, and refused comfort. "I will go down to the grave mourning for my son," he said. The man, once deceiver of others, was now deceived by his own blood. Years turned like the pages of a prophecy, but God's thread was still weaving unseen. The dreams of Joseph would rise in Egypt. Famine would drive Jacob's sons into his arms once more. The family born from sorrow would become a nation born of promise. From one flawed man came the tribes of Israel, the framework of a covenant that would stretch beyond centuries. The story of Jacob was never about perfection, it was about transformation. In him, we see humanity stripped bare cunning, and fear, love, and loss, deceit, and redemption. A man who lied to his father, fled his brother, wrestled his God, buried his wife, and wept for his son. Yet through it all, heaven kept its hand upon him. The God who appeared at Bethel, who wrestled him at Jabbok, who spared him through Esau, who blessed him in exile, and who carried him to Egypt, was the same God who had chosen him before birth. He was not chosen because he was good. He was chosen so that God's goodness could be revealed through him. God does not choose the perfect. He perfects the chosen. Jacob's final years were lived in Egypt. When he saw Joseph again alive, robed in royal splendor, he wept as a man who had seen both hell and heaven. The family he thought lost was restored, and his dying words carried the echo of every struggle. The God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless these sons. From the tent of deceit to the throne of Egypt, Jacob's life had traced the arc of divine grace. When his time came, he gathered his sons around him and spoke to each blessing and prophesying according to their destiny. Then drawing his feet onto the bed, he breathed his last. And Scripture says he was gathered to his people. The man who once fled alone into the wilderness now departed, surrounded by the roots of a nation. His bones would rest in the cave of Machpelah beside Abraham and Isaac, sealed forever in the soil of promise. The winds of Canaan whispered his name, Israel, the deceiver who became a pilgrim, the exile who became a father, the man who fought with God and prevailed. His limp became legend, his story became scripture. And through his line came kings, prophets, and finally a savior who would wrestle sin itself and triumph by surrender. The ladder Jacob once saw reaching into heaven would be fulfilled in Christ, where God himself would descend and dwell among men. The night of struggle became the dawn of redemption, not just for Jacob, but for every soul who wrestles in the dark and dares to cling until the blessing comes. And so the story ends where all faith begins, not in perfection, but in perseverance, not in pride, but in surrender. The God of Jacob is still the God who wrestles wounds and redeems, the same God who turns exiles into heirs, deceivers into disciples, and wanderers into witnesses. The sun rises once more over the hills of promise. The nation of Israel is born, and from one man's limp the world learns to walk with God. As the music fades and the story settles into silence, the narrator's voice softens into reflection. There are moments when we too stand by our own Jabbok alone, afraid, uncertain of what lies ahead. But if you hold on, if you refuse to let go until he blesses you, you will rise transformed. The God of Jacob still writes stories in scars and still calls flawed people his chosen ones. Stay with us after this chapter as we share a message for every listener who has wrestled through long years of life and still believes that dawn is coming. And so the story of Jacob does not truly end at his death because it was never only about him. It was about every soul who has walked through the long years of life carrying both scars and blessings. Jacob teaches us that faith is not the absence of struggle, it is the decision to hold on when everything in us wants to let go. He limped into his destiny, yet his limp became his testimony. Perhaps that is how God works with all of us. He does not erase our pain, but transforms it into wisdom. For those who have lived long enough to see dreams broken and rebuilt, take heart. You are not forgotten. The God who walked with Jacob through deserts and decades still walks beside you now. The years that humbled you have not been wasted, they have been holy ground. What matters most is not how perfectly you have lived, but how faithfully you have held on. Your story, like Jacob's, is still being written in the hands of grace. And when the final sunrise comes, may you too be able to say, "The God who has led me all my life, even to this day, has never let me go." From the struggle within a mother's womb to the dawn beside the river Jabbok, Jacob's journey is the story of every soul that has ever wrestled with God, with guilt, with time itself. He deceived, fled, endured, and fought, but in the end he was not destroyed. He was transformed. Jacob entered the night as a deceiver. He left the dawn as Israel. His story reminds us that redemption is not found in perfection, but in persistence, in the refusal to let go until grace breaks through the darkness. The blessing we long for does not always come in comfort. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a wound that teaches us who we are. What if your deepest struggle is not your enemy, but your encounter with God? The story of Jacob is not a tale from the past, it's a mirror for the present. For everyone who has limped through life's battles and still found faith on the other side. If this journey moved you, share it so others too may wrestle with these mysteries. Like this video if it stirred something in your soul, and subscribe for more hidden stories waiting to be uncovered. Explore the next film in our library and continue the journey into the mysteries of Scripture. Because every dawn, every scar, and every struggle still whispers the same truth: God is not finished with you yet.